أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله حمد الشاكرين. الحمد لله دائما وأبدا. الحمد لله على كل حال، ونعوذ بالله من حال أهل النار. اللهم لك الحمد حتى ترضى، ولك الحمد إذا رضيت، ولك الحمد بعد الرضا، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بك. لك الحمد اللهم على كل نعمة أنعمتها علينا يا رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وأنعم وأكرم على سيد الخلق، حبيبنا وشفيعنا وقرة أعيننا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه في الأولين، وصل وسلم وبارك اللهم على نبينا محمد في الآخرين، وصل وسلم وبارك اللهم على نبينا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. We begin as we always do by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and thanking Him. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for each and every single one of the blessings that He's given us. We thank Him Jalla Jalaluh for the blinking of our eyes. We thank Him for the beating of our hearts. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the stability of the earth beneath us and for the vastness of the heavens above us. We thank Allah for the twinkling of the stars. We thank Allah for every warm morsel of food, for every sip of our favorite drink. We thank Allah Ta'ala for the blessing of brotherhood and sisterhood. And we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the greatest of all blessings. And every blessing is only a blessing if it's known through this, the blessing of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. We ask Allah Jalla Jalaluh that He makes us from those who live and die by La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We have been on quite a journey together, studying the matters of spirituality, talking about the need to look beyond the mirrors of the bodies and look at the mirror of the heart, and to spend some time exploring the heart, understanding the heart, diagnosing the heart, and then working based off of what the scholars of Tazkiyah speak about, the treatments of the different symptoms of the heart. And we talked a lot about the idea of spending time diagnosing our hearts. And we mentioned a few different skills, and amongst those was the concept of muraqabah and muhasabah, the idea of self-observation and self-accountability. And so as we begin to discuss the different diseases of the heart, now we have the opportunity to begin to observe where these diseases might show up. And what we've talked about in our last session was that within each and every single one of us is the baseline or the ability to fall into any particular sin. That's why we don't look down on people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests each and every single one of us differently, but each and every single one of us have the capacity to fall into whatever type of disease of the heart. And so oftentimes we feel like that this is a disease for this person, when in reality, it may be only that in this season of our life, that this is the disease that is most amplified within us. And so as we study diseases, all of this to say, as we study diseases that may not seem particularly relevant to us, know that it is in my interest first and foremost, and Allah Ta'ala knows best, and in your interest to understand the general framework of all the diseases, the definition of each of the diseases, and then the symptomology of what that disease looks like, and then the treatment. And why is that? Because even if you feel like something is not a test for you today, there's nothing to say that it's not going to be a test for you an hour from now, or a day from now, or a year from now. And so becoming literate of how the scholars of spirituality like Al-Imam al-Mawlud and Al-Imam al-Ghazali and Al-Imam ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullahi al-Jami' define the diseases of the heart and define to us what it looks like through its symptoms, and the treatment is one of the best ways that we equip ourselves with the capacity then to diagnose the diseases and to treat those diseases. And we utilize the time, this is all a recap, and we utilize the time of muraqabah, we utilize the time of muraqabah to observe the possible moments when diseases creep in. Because one of the things that we've mentioned before is it's very easy that people come to like our mashayikh, like Mufti Abdul Wahab or Shaykh Abdullah, or the other teachers that we have, and they say, this is where I'm at in my life and I had no idea how I got here. I have no idea how I ended up in this major sin. Iyadhan billah, may Allah protect us and you. And the reality is that typically there are moments in which the disease of the heart creeps into the heart and finds its way into our life. And slowly the whispers begin, and being a person of muraqabah and muhasabah helps us to be individuals, muraqabah being self-observation, muhasabah being self-accountability. When we become those people, we end up diagnosing the disease early on, as opposed to being individuals that do not engage with the disease until maybe the dhawahir, or the manifestations of that disease become apparent. And it's easier to treat any disease, both physically and spiritually, the earlier that we know of it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who have tawfiq in overcoming the diseases of their heart. We ask Allah Jalla Jalaluh to give us the dawa, the medicine. Right? The Prophet ﷺ, he tells us, مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ دَاءً إِلَّا وَأَنزَلَ لَهُ dawa, that there is not a single disease that humanity is afflicted with, both spiritually or physically, except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given for us a disease for that. Whether it is the disease of hopelessness, the disease of anxiety, the disease of anger, the disease of jealousy or envy. All of these are diseases that, just as Allah Ta'ala willed that these diseases exist, part of Allah's rahmah and His lutf and His karam, His generosity and His love and His mercy towards us, is that Allah Ta'ala gave us cures for each and every single one of those diseases. And so this is a reminder to all of us to be a people of muraqabah and muhasabah, because it makes our work easier. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talked in the Quran, He says, who is the successful one? And we've mentioned this literally in every session so far. Man zakkaha. And zakkaha is an indication that it is a continuous effort of purification. And if my heart is continuously being purified, what does that mean is also happening? That my heart is continuously being what? Stained and diseased and impacted by my sins, by my poor choices. That my heart is continuously having the athar of sins, of dhunub and ma'asi. And so just as sins are continuously happening, similarly what also needs to continuously be happening is this effort of purification. And so today, inshallah ta'ala, we'll be talking about a particular disease of the heart that a lot of times we have a tendency to affiliate this disease of the heart with a particular segment of our community. And that is the disease of stinginess or miserliness. Al-bukhl wa-shuh. Stinginess and miserliness. And the reason why we struggle with this disease a lot is because we feel like, who is it that is afforded the opportunity to be stingy? Who is it that's afforded the opportunity to be miserly? Who is it? The people of power and the people of wealth, the people of affluence. And so when you're like a college student or someone that still has more debt than you can count, then you're like, man, like I don't even have the capacity. Alhamdulillah, one of the benefits of being financially broke is that I can't even be stingy. And so this is a disease. I can just check off the box. I don't have it because I don't have financial prosperity, for example, or what we may assume to be the definition of financial prosperity. But what this actually does is that when we put our guards down on the possibility of a disease entering our heart, what do you think is the natural consequence that happens? The disease comes in full force. And so therefore, some of the stingiest people are some of the brokest of people, the people that have the least amount. And that's because they are not anticipating or expecting the ability to fall into stinginess or miserliness, and so they become completely consumed of it. And we ask Allah to protect us from being from those people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately one of the best ways to look at miserliness is to affiliate it with a theological concept that we have. And that's why so many of the diseases of the heart are treated through ma'rifatillah. Remember, in one of the first, so many of the diseases of the heart are treated through knowing Allah, right? And that's why we said in the first session, man arifa Allah ahabbahu wa man ahabbahu ata'a. That the one who knows Allah the one who is in a state of ma'rifah of Allah will naturally and instinctively love Allah. And when they love Allah, they will naturally and instinctively do what? Obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a natural progression, right? And so when we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Razzaq, when we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Razzaq, Ar-Razzaq here is a name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that indicates to us that any and every type of giving is from Allah. And not only that, but the continuity of blessings, istimrar al-ni'mah, the continuity of things being as they are, is also sourced in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that the scholars of spirituality, they say Ar-Razzaq indicates to us that no rizq is with us from us. No rizq is with us from us. But instead, every rizq that we have is from Ar-Razzaq. Every rizq that we have is from Ar-Razzaq. Inna Allah huwa Ar-Razzaqu dhul quwwatil mateen. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Razzaq. And that means that everything is from Allah. Even in general, when we engage with human beings, right now, my phone is my phone and it is not your phone, right? It's good that we clarified that, right? We removed that. However, the fascinating thing about Allah Jalla Jalaluh is that when Allah Ta'ala is the possessor of things, Allah Ta'ala does not compete with anyone in anything that He possesses. So people possess, but people possess in the capacity that Allah Ta'ala allows them to possess. Does that make sense? And them possessing is not any less of Allah possessing, because why? Because Allah possesses them. Does that make sense? So Allah Ta'ala gave us, for example, our eyes. We feel that we are essentially the owners of our eyes, when in reality, it is Allah Ta'ala that is the owner of our eyes and the owner of us who feel that we own our eyes. And so when the human being engages with the reality of Allah Ta'ala being Ar-Razzaq, then it helps to identify the source of the fundamental, the root sickness within al-tam' or al-bukhl or al-shuh, stinginess or miserliness, is that an individual is deceived to think that they actually own something, when we ultimately own nothing. We are mamluk, we are possessed, we are owned, we are the property of Allah, living on the property of Allah, with the property of Allah, indebted to Allah, and at the mercy of Allah. And any level of stinginess is because we've been deceived and we're in this illusion to believe that at some point of time we are the possessors of anything, when in reality we are just the receivers. And you'll notice this dynamic actually manifests itself very ironically with who? With parents and their child. Parents and their child. وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلِ الْأَعْلَى. And Allah Ta'ala is above all examples. But when a dad teaches his son, or when a mother teaches her son or daughter how to speak, and then the child uses the tongue that they only learned how to speak against their parent. Recently, my son is on this complete wave of no. Everything is no. Do you want to wear the red pants or the blue pants? I want to wear the blue pants. Okay, khalas, I'm gonna wear the red pants. And if he gets an idea that me or his mom want him to wear a specific thing, he will always want the opposite thing, because it's his way of trying to establish his authority, right? Similarly, the human being is subconsciously without knowing it, and this is why we have to be careful with the diseases of the heart. We are subconsciously sometimes pushing back at the decrees of Allah and the distribution of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why the scholars of spirituality, particularly with the idea of bukhl, the idea of stinginess and miserliness, they say to monitor it carefully because we may be slowly removing Allah ta'ala from the equation. That this is my wealth, I get to do with my wealth what I want to do. When in reality, it's that Allah has given me this wealth, and Allah Ta'ala is saying now, what will you do with the wealth that I've given to you? Whose wealth does it never stop being? It never stops being the wealth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, inna Allah huwa al-Razzaq. Allah Ta'ala is al-Razzaq, means even in the moments when I own my car, even in the moments when I own my house, even in the moments when I am the responsible individual or the one who is the caregiver of someone else, or whatever the case may be, it doesn't remove Allah Ta'ala from the equation. And in fact, there's something that's important that the scholars highlight. It is that being a person of generosity has a consequence that is positive, not only in your dynamic with Allah, but also in your dynamic with the creation. And that's why one of the Salaf, he says something, he says, جود الرجل يحببه إلى أعدائه وبخل الرجل يكرهه إلى أولاده. That an individual that is generous can be loved even by his enemies. But an individual that's stingy can be hated by even his own children. Why is that? Because generosity is an indication of you prioritizing the one you're giving more than what you're giving. The one you're giving more than what you are giving. And stinginess is the opposite. When for example, Akhuna Muhammad says, I love your scarf. Can I have your scarf? And you say, you know what? No, I'm not going to give you my scarf. I'm going to keep it for me. What you're really saying is, I value me possessing the scarf more than I value you. This is not an invitation for people to like start taking things from each other. But just as an example, it's an indication that there is a prioritization that's different. And so that's why the scholar, he says, if you want your enemies even to hate you, be generous with them. Because generosity shows people a language of love, of them being more important than that which you have. And similarly, the people that love you the most, the minute you become stingy with them, the moment you become stingy with them, the love begins to diminish, because to them, you've told them through your stinginess that this item that I possess is of a greater priority, than you to me. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, he says that the angels, every single day, they make a dua. What do the angels say? Allahumma a'ti munfiqan khalafa. Allahumma a'ti munfiqan khalafa. That, oh Allah, give the one who gives a replacement and more than what he gave. The angels. There's a group of angels. In fact, in one of the descriptions of the scholars, he says Allah Ta'ala created a group of angels with no other job but to make dua, oh Allah, give the one who gives what he has given and more. And oh Allah, give the ones who kept in his hands what he's kept. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a'ati mumsikan talafa. Oh Allah, allow it to be that there is nothing left with them. Or allow it to be that there is no more that they are holding. What that means, my dear brothers and sisters, is that even the angels are attracted to our generosity. Because our generosity is an indication of us knowing that Allah is al-Mu'ti, and that when we are doing i'ta, Allah is the giver. And when we are the ones that are giving, it is only that we have allowed Allah to give through us. That's why the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anil Jamii', they used to view it as like a sign of Allah Ta'ala's love for them. That someone would come and ask them for something. Because to them it meant what? That Allah Jalla Jalaluhu is providing for this hungry person, or Allah is providing for this person that needs clothing. And Allah finds me befitting to be the mechanism or the tool that He utilizes to feed or to clothe this needy person. And that's why the angels, they say, oh Allah, just as they use that moment of giving, that means that they know that you are the one who gives, so Allah give them more. And as for the one who holds back, clearly they feel like they're the ones who gives and takes, so oh Allah, give them not more. Give them not more, because they think that they're the ones calling the shots. And one of the scholars, he gave a very good analogy. He says the dunya is meant to be held loosely in the hand. The dunya, any materialistic part of this world and just the nature of this world, you hold it loosely. And the tighter you squeeze it, the more what happens? The more it falls between your fingers. You hold like some dirt or some sand, and you hold it tightly. You need to have your hand open to some degree. Give it some breathability, some looseness. Otherwise, the more that you strongly clench it, the more that it will escape you. And that is what it means to be a person of generosity. That you possess a level of the dunya that Allah has allowed you to possess. But you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to own it in a way that you're not the only one that holds it. That as you are holding things, Allah ta'ala is allowing other people to have accessibility to it as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He describes to us the human being in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ. That the human being is in this continuous state of panic. That the human being is in this continuous state of panic. إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا. If he is prevented something, if he's tested with difficulty, he's running away frantically looking for this thing. I need a job, I need a job, I need a job, I need a job. You get that job? No, I'm not giving what I get from this job to nobody. I got this job. I got me this job. So you're either frantically trying to get something, or the minute you're getting it, you're frantically doing everything you can to prevent anyone else from taking it from you. You know what that sounds like? That sounds like some Hunger Games right there. That sounds like every man, woman, and child for themselves. And that is not the nature of the believing woman and man. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ. Except those who are musallin. Now musallin generally is understood as the people of prayer. But musallin also means those who are linked to Allah Jalla Jalaluh. Why? Because if they're linked to Allah and they're connected to Allah, they know that everything is sourced in Allah. So they break out of this general human panic. I need a job, I need a job, I need a job. I need to get married, I need to get married, I need to get married. I'll tell you right now, my brothers and sisters, I know of people that were like, I need to get into this school frantically. A week after they got into that school, it's like, man, I can't believe I'm dealing with this right now. It is the worst thing that ever happened to you. I don't know how I got myself in this. And then they said, oh, I need to get married, I need to get married, I need to get married. Then they got married. And then the day after they got married, man, if she can just leave me alone for an entire 3 minutes, that would be great. And it's this constant want and want and want. And that's why one of the diseases of the heart that's connected to stinginess is a level of, is a lack of the presence of qana'ah, not having contentment. So because you're not content with what you have, you're holding tightly because you just want more and more and more and more. And this is where we begin to see the diseases of the heart intersecting with one another, kind of connecting with one another. Because a person who is lacking in contentment is afraid to lose everything that they have, but also what? Not satisfied with what they do have. And this also leads to other diseases of the heart, like jealousy, envy, and these kind of things. And so ultimately the idea here is two main points so far. One is the understanding that that stinginess or miserliness is not a disease that impacts the affluent or those who are in power alone. But in fact, stinginess and miserliness tends to find itself most in the hearts of those that think it's not relevant to them, which tends to be the people who have less. And yet stinginess and miserliness impacts them greater because they are less prepared to overcome its symptoms. And because they've been deceived into thinking that they have nothing that they can be stingy with, and they have undervalued what Allah Ta'ala has given to them, and they've overvalued what Allah Jalla Jalaluhu has given to others. Does that make sense? And then the other point that we mentioned is that this idea of stinginess or miserliness is one that the Prophet ﷺ indicated to us shows a lack of understanding of Allah being Ar-Razzaq, Allah being the provider. Because there is this deception to think that we own what we own, when in reality, Allah Ta'ala owns us and what we own. And so going back to that fundamental issue of us deceiving ourselves into thinking it is what the beginning of the healing looks like. Renewing this understanding of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala being the ultimate owner. And that's why one of the scholars, he says, النظر إلى البخيل يؤلم القلب. He says, looking at a stingy person hurts the heart. Looking at a stingy person hurts the heart. And then he continues and he said something very interesting. And then spending time with extremely stingy people, it poisons and hardens the heart. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Why would seeing them cause you discomfort, but then being with them long enough leads your heart to becoming hard? Sister, go ahead.
Because it influences your own thought process?
Correct. If they're not sharing their food, what am I not going to do? Share my food, right? Classic lunchroom story, right? You're not going to give me half your cheese stick. Guess who's not getting half of my apple, right? This is my daily scenario. But the point is that being with stinginess invites us to be stingy. But why does it initially, he says, hurt? Because of what we said earlier, right? Go ahead, sister. What is it?
Sorry. Yeah, because you're seeing them with the blessings and you're like, why can't you realize it?
Correct. But you're seeing them with the blessing, and what are they telling you when they're being stingy? They're telling you, what did we say? That they value that thing more than they value you or their relationship with you, right? We talked about the scarf. It's like, I love Umar, I love Muhammad, and he loves my scarf, but I love my scarf more than him, so I'm not going to give him my scarf, right? So the scholar, he says, النظر إلى البخيل يؤلم القلب ويقسي القلب. He says that that looking at a stingy person initially hurts the heart because you see them valuing what's in their heart, what's in their hands more than you. And then ultimately it leads to the hardening of the heart because a society, right, intended cough there, a society that is focused on stinginess and greed and self-centeredness will lead you to what? Becoming the same way. If it's every man for himself, then what? Then I'll become like that too, right? And that's why one of the scholars, he says, البخيل عبد للمال والجواد سيد لماله. البخيل عبد للمال والجواد أو الكريم سيد لماله. He says the stingy person is the slave of their own money. Why? Because their money clearly dictates how they feel. But the generous person is the master of their money. Because they control their money does not control them. And so being a person who has this level of, again, externalization from your own wealth, it makes you to be the owner of your money instead of your money owning you. And there's too many people in the world that money owns them. And we ask Allah for protection. What does that mean? It means I'm only as valuable as the car that I drive. And I'm only as cool as the kicks that I wear. And I'm only as successful as my annual paycheck. and I'm frantically searching. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا. I'm in this constant state of irritability and anxiousness because I need more and more and more, because otherwise, where is my worth? Where is my worth, right? And that's why Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, that Abu Darda radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he says, وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ جَمَّاعٍ. He says, woe to the one who chooses to be a jamma', a person who is constantly just collecting their money and checking up on it, collecting their money and checking up on it. Like they've centered that to be the source of their worth. And stinginess is a person who's placed their worth in what they have, as opposed to placing their worth external to what they possess. Jameel, is this clear? And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us in the Quran, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تُلْهِكُمْ أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَلَا أَوْلَادُكُمْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَمَنْ يَفْعَلْ ذَلِكَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمْ الْخَاسِرُونَ. O human beings, O mankind. And then who is He speaking about in this particular ayah? يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Allah is talking to people of Iman, people who know Allah, people who love Allah, people who are devoted to Allah. He says, do not allow your wealth, He mentions first, and then your family, your children, لا تلهكم, do not allow them to distract you from the remembrance of Allah. And the one who does that, they are indeed a loser. Why? Because in the process of them being distracted from Allah, and them prioritizing their wealth, and them holding tight to their wealth, the only thing that you can end up becoming when you are a stingy individual is that you end up being a loser. And one of the scholars, he says, Al-Bakhil khasira ad-dunya wal-akhirah. That the stingy person, they are a loser in the world and they are a loser in the hereafter. Because in the dunya, they are disliked by the creation, and in the akhirah, they are disliked by the Creator. We ask Allah Ta'ala to protect us from being a people of stinginess. What does it look like to be stingy? What are some like moments of stinginess? Yes.
Not giving charity.
Not giving charity, right? Not giving charity and not gifting loved ones. And the scholars, they usually compile that together. Like if when you go out with your mom, you're like, I hope she pulls out the credit card. Man, that would be great if she can just pay for this Starbucks in the pre-BDS era, right? Like man, I just hope that someone else pays. So we want to expand it where it's not just generosity, but it is in fact not just generosity in terms of charity, but it's even generosity with people in our life, right? That if a person does not give, that this is an indication of a person having a level of stinginess with them. Now, what if some of you might be thinking, like low-key, that happens to me sometimes, right? And it happens to all of us at times. When it is, when there's that bitterness, remember the ayah in the Quran. لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You will not attain real piety or righteousness until you give from that which you love. Why? Because that means that your love for Allah is trumping your love for the dunya. And that's what generosity is. And in those moments of charity, that's why the scholars, they say for the stingy person, it's not valuable that the stingy person right now, you're like, man, like Tariq is right, let me just give $1,000. The scholars of Tazkiyah, they'll tell you something else. They'll say, no, give $1 today, $1 tomorrow, $1 the day after. You're going to be like, at the end of the month, you're saying I'll give $30. I'm telling you, I'm ready to give $1,000 right now. Scholars of spirituality say it will be better for you to give $1 a day for 30 days than for you to give $1,000 right now. Why is that? Because this is not about the money. Allah can feed the hungry and Allah will feed the hungry. It's about your heart detaching from the dunya and attaching to the pleasure of Allah. And bukhul, stinginess, is a lack of our heart attaching to Allah and an increase in our heart being attached to the dunya. And so one of the signs of a person of stinginess is their inability to give in charity to their family and to those who are in need. And particularly, I want to throw in a little bit of nuance, right? Everyone here has a rich friend. Everyone here knows somebody that's wealthier than them. Try to go out of your way to give to them as well. Because at that point of time, not only are you treating stinginess, what else are you treating? What else are you treating? Jealousy, or the possibility of jealousy. You're changing the narrative from why do they have what they have and I don't have, to saying I'm going to be the one to treat them. And that is a level of, like, remember there's like, even in medicine, there's preventative medicine and then there's like just treatment, right? And so we want to highlight preventative medicine, and one of the preventative, proactive ways to combat envy or jealousy is one of them, and we'll talk about more of them when we cover that, is to be an individual who gives to people that you are feeling a little bit of a bitterness towards what Allah has chosen to give them. So generally, the scholars, they say that one of the signs of stinginess is an individual who lacks the capacity to give to their family and to those that are in need. And then we added the little touch of giving to those that have more, as a way not just to combat stinginess, but to combat jealousy as well. What else does stinginess look like? Yes.
Like hesitation to give, or reducing, like instead of doing $20, like $5, or I'll give 5 minutes instead of half an hour.
Beautiful, right? With the scholars, they talk about it as in a little bit of like a specification. They say it's not just not giving to those in need. They say sometimes, and this is where it gets very subtle, right? Because sometimes people will give a lot publicly, but where will they not give? Privately. And what do I mean by privately? They'll give $10,000 in the masjid fundraiser, but when their wife says, I need $20, what will they say? Get your own $20. And that type of falling short with the obligations that Allah Ta'ala has given to us is a special type of stinginess. And it's a very, very particularly dangerous of it, because now we're going from praiseworthy giving to giving that is an obligation. And Allah Ta'ala, nothing is more pleasing to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala than for us to fulfill the obligations. And so we want to also be mindful of the rights of those who we have duties towards. Our parents, our children, our siblings, our cousins, our extended family, people that are closer to us, we have a greater sense of obligation towards them. And what is usually the case? Do people throw you an award ceremony when you buy a sandwich for your mom? Likely not, right? What about when you buy it for your kids? 0%. You're lucky if your kids even say thank you to you, right? But that is the part that's valuable, that it removes the expectation of any worldly gain and pleasure, but you're doing it because it's what Allah Ta'ala wants from you. And so the scholars, they highlight a particular symptom of stinginess, which is not just that you're not generous with the poor and the needy, because sometimes there's external worldly benefits that happen when you give those who are poor and needy, but it's when you choose to be like restricting with your family and your loved ones and those who you have obligations of. Does that make sense? What is another manifestation of that? Yes?
I remember last time in your class you mentioned being stingy with your smile.
Jameel. Beautiful. You're not smiling at me, bro. Jazakumullah khair. So one of the areas where people become stingy is when they view generosity to only be in one language. And what is unfortunate, what that is affiliated with is in a misconception of what rizq is. Let me be very clear. This moment is a rizq from Allah. The person sitting next to you is a rizq from Allah. Every phone number that you have of a loved one is a rizq from Allah. Every lunch outing that you have between classes is a rizq from Allah. And every rizq can be spent for Allah. You guys see? Everything is a rizq. Everything is a rizq. And every rizq can be spent for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so our smiles, our check-ins, our asking, how are you? Our just engaging with one another, all of that is a type of arzaq, is a type of giving. And the best way to remember this, and this is going to be slightly uncomfortable, is if you want to ask yourself, is it a rizq or not? Ask yourself, would it be possible for it to be absent? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the ability to take anything and everything away. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us and not to take from us. But it is within the capacity of Allah to take things. So to view everything as a giving of Allah gives me the opportunity to do what? To spend it for Allah. And that means my ability to smile is a way that I spend my smile in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My ability to look at a tree is me utilizing my eyes and utilizing the light that allows me to see the tree and utilizing the tree as a means to do what? To remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of these are acts of generosity. Be generous with your fingers by flipping the pages of the Quran. Be generous with your eyes by gazing upon the beauty of His creation. Right? Be generous with your mouth by saying words that are pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then there's the entire other element, which is to be generous with what? To be generous with your time. To be generous with your time. Use your time with Allah. Use your time with yourself. Use your time with friends and family. But do not if time is wealth, right? Which is what we're saying when we say Tariq. How foolish is the one who burns his wealth. Imagine you have $1 million and you're like, hey, Tariq, come over to my house, want to have a money burning ceremony, right? You're like, okay, khalas. I'm like, I have a better idea. Give me the money and then I'll just set up a nice campfire for you, right? Because you're like, why would you waste that money? But an individual that's not utilizing their time for them and not utilizing their time for Allah and not utilizing the time, they have a rizq, a giving of Allah that they are quite literally burning, setting to fire, destroying. My dear brothers and sisters, it's only going to be 7:54 p.m. on November 9th, 2023, once in your life, not a single other time. How is that moment being spent? Now, thankfully, alhamdulillah, we are currently using that moment to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what about the many minutes, the many hours that are spent with us just numbingly wasting time in pointless things without even any intentionality or meaning? That is a level of stinginess. But who are we being stingy with in that moment? We're being stingy with Allah and stingy with ourselves. Stingy with our own selves. That Allah gave us the opportunity to heal and we chose it to destruct. That Allah gave us the opportunity to obey and we used it to disobey. That Allah Ta'ala gave us an opportunity to draw near to Him and we did what? We distance ourselves from Him. So there are people that are generous with Allah and generous with themselves, and so many are the people that are stingy with Allah and stingy with themselves. And the statement of the Salaf rings a bell here, in which they says, "Al-hurru abdun ma tama' wal-abdu hurrun al-hurru abdun ma tama' wal-abdu hurrun ma tama'." It's a statement of the scholars. They say the free one is enslaved. The free one is enslaved so long as he is stingy, and the slave is free as long as he is generous. Did you guys get that? Man, that was easier said than done. This idea of freeing ourselves from shackles is affiliated with us acknowledging rizq as rizq, acknowledging rizq as rizq, acknowledging the razzaq as the razzaq, and then utilizing the rizq from the razzaq for Him to be pleased with us. if we see rizq for what it is, and we understand that rizq is an opportunity and not a right, then I'm going to utilize the rizq from Ar-Razzaq to earn pleasure with Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. I just had one more. What are some of the other things that, what are some of, like real quick, what are some of the things that prevent us from being a people of generosity? We've indicated it to some degree. Waswas. How so?
You may want to give in charity, and the shaitan may whisper to you, don't give, you got something else to do, you got a bill, stuff like that.
Beautiful, right? The waswas. And that waswas there is telling you, like, see, that's good. You're saying you got bills. Like some people will say some other things, right? Like, oh man, you're saving up for that vacation to Hawaii. You know what I mean? Bills is a real thing, and we have obligations to fulfill those things, right? But of course, like what sometimes happens is at times of generosity, we're like, whoa, you got bills to pay. But then you go to Costco and you spend $350, right? So it's like, do you only have bills to pay when it's time to give in charity, but then otherwise you don't, right? So one of the things that the scholars say is the greatest source of stinginess is a mismanaged or an overly amplified love of the dunya. When the love of the dunya is so strong in a person, then what are they maybe even subconsciously not realizing is happening? In the process of loving the world, what are they losing love of? The akhirah, right? Because the heart can only love so much. The heart can only love so much. And if the dunya is taking more and more and more and more of your heart, what are you going to end up loving less? The akhirah. And so one of the things that the scholars, they say is that stinginess is a result of an overly amplified love of the dunya. And when people love the dunya too much, what does that tell us? That they don't understand the dunya enough. That they've been deceived. They have mismanaged the expectations of the dunya. Because the one who knows the reality of the dunya, the haqiqah of the dunya, there's going to be parameters for how much they love this dunya. Because they know that this dunya is, what have we said again and again? This dunya is temporary. This dunya is fragile. This dunya is deceiving and fleeing. And so you can only love something so much if it is as temporary and fragile and deceiving as the world that we're in. And so stinginess is an indication that a person's love of the dunya has immense, and as a result of the love of the dunya increasing, their love for the akhirah has gotten less. What is another like source of stinginess? And we'll end with this, inshallah. I know that we've went over time, so my apologies. What is another one? Yes.
I was gonna say, like, when we were talking about the smile, maybe not wanting to come across as weak.
Perhaps that an individual has like, in fact, this will connect with one of the other diseases of the heart, which is arrogance. Because arrogance, what is arrogance actually rooted in? A few things, but what is the main source of arrogance? But why do people typically project that they think they're better? Because they are insecure. Isn't that so funny? It's like as an opposite result, I'm going to tell myself and think that I'm better and like it's called takabbur or istikbar for a reason, right? What does that mean? It's like something is chota wala, right? Little. And you're just like, it's like a little balloon that's deflated and you're just like pumping it with air. It's like, aha, look how big that I can be. But if the minute you let go of the balloon, what happens? That really embarrassing sound, and then it flattens out, right? So similarly, sometimes we lack in al-akhlaq al-mahmuda or al-akhlaq al-hamida, praiseworthy traits, which is what you're saying, like that, because we view them to be weak, right? And this is definitely something that can lead to that, right? But the last thing that I wanted to highlight is and in fact it's mentioned here. But another thing that is this a lack of hope and conviction in Allah's ability and promise to re-give and give more. Yani one of the reasons why we're stingy is because there's a lack, there's a level of, I'm going to use strong words here, and so forgive me for this, but there's a level of a fear and maybe even like a doubt that Allah will re-give what He's given and give more. So like, listen, I got this money. I don't know if I'm going to get this money again, so I'm going to hold this money for dear life because who are you really questioning His ability to give you again there? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How awkward does that sound? How inappropriate does that sound? And so utilizing these sources is a good way to find not just the disease, but what the disease tells us of inner problematic thoughts that we have. At a moment of stinginess, a part of it is me saying, I love the dunya too much. A part of it is me saying, maybe this generosity can be seen as weakness, and this being a sign of inner arrogance. But a part of it that's very real is that maybe I'm not hopeful or optimistic enough of what Allah can do and will do for me. Does that make sense? So even the diseases of the heart, they're like little windows into realizing other diseases of the heart that may lie within us. And that's why we want to always observe. What did we mention last time? Observe the why. Observe the why behind our actions. Observe the why behind our questions. Observe the why behind our tendencies. And that will be something that inshallah ta'ala will be very like insightful for us inshallah ta'ala.